This was the essence of the civil rights movement, the height of the civil rights movement downtown. What happened was is that the students had put so much pressure on the downtown merchants that they got with the members of the black members of of Atlanta, which included A.T. Walden, C.A. Baycoat, um, Warren Cochran, and many other leaders, and they tried to work out a proposal to stop the demonstrations. So they came up with a proposal. The proposal suggested that if the student would stop demonstrating for 6 months, they would desegregate Atlanta, the hotels in it, the restaurants in Atlanta, downtown, the downtown restaurants, including the Riches and other stores. That was the proposal. Lonnie King and others had to respond to that, and black leaders was telling them that this is something that you ought to do, and they did not trust all black leaders, and they didn't trust any of the white leaders downtown area. So it was a tremendous burden that they had to make. So they decided to go ahead with the with the decision to accept the proposal. Well, when they got back to the student body at Atlanta University, the students all thought it was the worst thing that could happen. They reneged on it. We do not want this to happen, see. So Lonnie King says, I'm going to have to reverse it. We cannot accept this. And he called a meeting for a meeting at Warren Memorial Church. The pastor of that church was Reverend Creasy. And so we had a meeting there. That meeting, the church was packed on that night. And the students were there, and the Atlanta black community was there. And the question was whether or not the students would accept. They said, no, we're not going to accept it, whether they would reverse that decision and accept the proposal of the merchants downtown. Black leaders began to speak, asking them to do that. Two speeches are important. One was from A.T. Walden. A.T. Walden was one of the first black lawyers in Atlanta, and he was the first black appointed municipal judge in Atlanta and in the South. And he represented what the students would refer to as the old guard. And he spoke that night and told the students that if they would accept the proposal, that he, Walden, would march with them if the white people reneged on their promise. The students did not accept that. The students did not believe that. For some reason, they didn't have the trust in Walden that maybe some of us thought they should have had, but they had a reason for not. And other black leaders spoke at that meeting, asking the students to reconsider their decision. But the thing that saved the meeting, the one speech that saved the meeting, and caused the students to change their mind, was a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. I was on the stage. I was on the platform where he was speaking. And he said to the students, among other things, if you decide to accept the recommendation of the white merchants and stop marching, stop your demonstration, say if you decide to do that, I, Martin Luther King Jr., will march with you if they reneged on their word. If they say they
Continue, I'm sorry.
if they say that they're not going to do it, I will march with you. It was that speech that electrified the audience. It was that speech. But for that, they would never change their mind. When Martin Luther King said, I will march with you if they renege, if they decide that they're not going to desegregate the counters after you have stopped your demonstration, I will march with you. That was the height of the meeting. Now, Walden said the same thing, but the students didn't believe that. The students did believe in Martin Luther King Jr., and they reversed their position and say we will accept the proposal of the merchants from downtown. And they did that, and the demonstration stopped for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, the Riches and the other kept their word and desegregated downtown. And that's what happened, and that's the story.
Okay, let's talk about the Atlanta Inquirer.
The Atlanta Inquirer was founded by a professor from Clark University and Jesse Hill. The professor was, and I'll get it for you in just a minute, the professor from Atlanta University and Jesse Hill. And then they had a board of directors. And on the board of directors was Jesse Hill, Herman Russell, Dr. Warner, I was on the board of directors. Clarence Coleman was on the board of directors of the Atlanta Inquirer. And the Inquirer was a paper that was in tune with what the student movement was doing. Now, we had another newspaper in Atlanta, the Atlanta Daily World, and we had the Atlanta Constitution, Atlanta Journal. All of them were fine papers, but many of them did not reflect the views of the student movement in terms of their goal, their purpose, their ambition, and what they were marching for. The Atlanta Inquirer became really the newspaper of the student movement because they believed in their goals and their objectives. They wanted to desegregate Atlanta, and so that the members, the board of directors of the Atlanta Inquirer, wanted to support the student movement and wanted to improve the welfare of the black folks in Atlanta. The relationship between the Inquirer and the student movement was very significant because it hierarched and pushed the newspaper into a most favored position in the community. The Inquirer became a very influential paper in the community. And in the election in the mayoral election between Ivan Allen and Muggsy Smith, the Atlanta Inquirer played a very great role. They supported Ivan Allen, and other black leaders supported Muggsy Smith, but Ivan Allen won. So Atlanta Inquirer became a paper to be reckoned with in Atlanta.
Wonderful. Let's talk about the movement lawyers, Donald Hollowell, Howard Moore Jr., and the impact that they had on the Atlanta student movement.
Don Hollowell was a great lawyer, and Moore was a part of his firm, and Vernon Jordan became a part of his firm later on, and so was Horace Ward. All of them were great lawyers. All of them were my friends, and all of them had a dedication to human justice. And they did what lawyers should do, and they represented the students. Now, there was an adult liaison committee in Atlanta, and I was a part of that committee, along with Q.B. Williamson and Clarence Coleman and others. But our job as the liaison committee was to provide funds to get the students out of jail and to coordinate the relationship between the students and the community. And we did that. When the student got in jail, QB Williamson put together a program or a project by which we would provide money for the students to get out of jail. But Hollowell and Ward and Moore did a magnificent job of representing the students when called upon to do so.
And did you want to talk about the Freedom Riders and their impact?
No, but obviously they had an impact. The question was interstate travel, buses, trains, and what have you. And even though the law says segregation had to go, the truth of the matter is that when you got inside the bus or bus station, you had desegregation. You had segregation, and the same was. And what happened is that when the students began that movement of traveling from state to state, bus to bus, they discovered that the law said one thing, but the practice was another. The law said you could not have segregation, but the practice was there was segregation in fact. And it was disposing of that caused that federal government to revise a part of the law and to make certain that in interstate commerce there was no segregation.